Mr. Chair, if I may, I just wanted to clarify that our proposal isn't to prohibit the use for routine maintenance. It's to give districts the option of using it for maintenance or other things such as new construction and modernization.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from about our charter school facility grant program from Katrina Johansson. Who else is coming? And also, I apologize, Moira Top. I apologize.
Thank you, members, for the invitation to address the committee today. As you may know, CSFA was created in 1985 to finance school facilities. In 2002, CSFA was written into the Charter School Facility Program, which you heard about earlier, and since that time we received three $50 million federal grants for school facilities and secured a federal credit enhancement grant. Since 2013-14, we have been charged with administering the state-funded Charter School Facility Program, SB 740, as well as the Charter School Revolving Loan Fund program. Additionally, since 2010, we have served as conduit issuer on 36 bond and note financings for charter schools totaling $373 million. I lost my notes. Today, we were asked to discuss and address to this board specifically information about the Charter School Facility Grant Program and to address the following: the purpose of the program, funding levels, eligibility for the program, the number of schools served, and the authorized uses for the grant proceeds. The purpose of the Charter School Facility Program is to provide financial assistance for classroom-based charter schools. Since 13-14, CSFA has made the following disbursements. We made 38 disbursements for 11-12 applications totaling $4.3 million, 270 disbursements for 12-13 applications totaling $36 million, 913 disbursements for 13-14 applications totaling $64 million, and 281 disbursements for 14-15 totaling $29 million. That's 1,502 disbursements, and since July 2013, when we took program administration over, we've made disbursements totaling $133 million. Did anyone have any questions? Want me to be more on point given our time constraints?
You were absolutely on point. Thank you. Very good.
I was asked to address program eligibility, which is outlined in Section 47614.5A2 of the Education Code. It's also outlined in our program regulations, which our board adopted. So to be eligible for this program, you must have a current charter in place. 70% or more of the pupil enrollment at the charter school site must be eligible for free or reduced price meals, or the charter school site can be physically located in the attendance area of a local public elementary school in which 70% or more of the students are eligible for free or reduced price meals. And as of January 1, 2015, which was pursuant to Assembly Bill 948, that 70% threshold is reduced by 1 percentage point at a time, but no lower than 60% if additional program funding is available. And we will be implementing that AB 948 in our regulations at our next month board meeting. As it relates to, bear with me. Where was I? Eligibility. We define eligible costs in our regulations as well as the California School Accounting Manual as rent and lease costs for a charter school facility, and we also pay for costs associated with remodeling school buildings, deferred maintenance, initially installing or extending service systems, and other built-in equipment, and improving school sites. The cap on funding under this program is $750 per ADA, or 75% of a charter school's facility cost, whichever is less. And then, let's see, I think that was it for my part.
Yes, Mr. Chavez.
So I can understand the California School Finance, you're part of treasurer?
The state treasurer serves as the chair of the CSFA, and the director of finance is a member, as well as the superintendent of public school instruction.
So you're with who?
I'm within the treasurer's office.
Okay. The question I asked previously, do you know how many, do you have the life cycle or management of the charter school facilities that we're investing in? Do you have any information like that?
Investing in through SB 740?
Yeah, we're giving state money out. I'm just wondering how many, what is it? I'm getting down to the management of the facilities that we're building. Do you have any insight into how the charter schools are managing their facilities, the life cycle, the investment?
I would say a majority of the schools funded through SB 740 are privately leased facilities that are leased by a private landlord. Those that are using SB 740 funds to pay for bond debt service, those are primarily new construction, and charters have been issuing debt for about 10 years now to finance school facilities, so those are relatively new facilities. But we do not get into the details of how those buildings are maintained or the useful life of those buildings.
And do you have any efficiency money, energy efficiency money that goes to the charters?
We do not. But I would imagine that some of the financings that we're partaking in are financing energy efficiency provisions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments from the committee? Seeing none. Ms. Moira Top.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members and staff. I promise to be succinct at this late hour. Moira Top here on behalf of the Charter Schools Association. This is a very important issue for charter schools, and we appreciate the opportunity to be here. There are about 1,200 charter schools in the state. Nearly 10% of the student population now resides in charter schools. And that's about more than 500,000 students in our schools. We have a waiting list of 91,000 students today, and it continues to grow. Facilities are probably the single largest issue facing charter schools today, and certainly facing the issues of the waiting list that children are on today, that we can't find space for them in our schools. There's been a lot of discussion today about using Prop 98 dollars, and I can assure you, unfortunately, that the majority of charter schools end up having to use their Prop 98 allocations on facilities today. They have to pull their dollars out of their general funds and use them for facility costs. So we are very appreciative of the various programs that do exist in the state today. There are a myriad of programs because there are myriad schools in the state. There are different kinds of charter schools. There are charter schools that have just been chartered within their first year. There are charter schools that have existed for 22 years and have a larger organization component affiliated with them. So we do think that it's important and appreciate the fact that the state recognizes the need for various different types of programs. Specifically, we've been asked to talk about the Charter School Facility Grant Program that Mr. Hansen outlined. It's a very important program for our schools. Again, it is a program for lease costs. So these are schools that are in rented facilities. They're usually some of your newer schools, some of your smaller schools that are serving, by serving high free and reduced price lunch student populations. We do think the program could use improvements. In fact, something that we've been a proponent of for some time is actually loosening the guidelines and the law with respect to lease payments. To the Vice Chair's comment about whether or not this is a program used for investing in schools, currently we are prohibited from using these funds for actually purchase. And so we end up in a situation where schools are kind of habitual renters. And if we really want to support our charter schools and we want to make good fiduciary fiduciary decisions, moving from that perpetual renter stage to property owner is probably an important discussion to have, and we would welcome that dialogue as time goes on. We do support the governor's proposal to expand the program. We think that certainly as our school numbers have grown, as our school population has grown, there's a great need for it. We especially appreciate the fact that we're now linking programs. The left hand actually would know what the right hand is doing in terms of linking the percentage that's required in this program at 55%, which is the same percentage for the LCFF program. So there's a lot of synergy within the programs, and we think that's important as well. So we do support the governor's proposal, and we appreciate this dialogue and look forward to the continued dialogue throughout the year.
Thank you. Thank you both. Any comments from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. Gentlemen, thank you for your presentation today and your answers. We appreciate it very much. And we look forward to working with you in the future because I think we do have more work to do. So, with that, if we could bring up Mr. Jeffrey Vinson. He is Deputy Director of the Center for Cities Schools at UC Berkeley. Mr. Vinson, or Dr. Vinson.
Thank you.
I apologize.
I will be very, very succinct. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, committee members and chair, and thank you so much for having me. I'm Jeff Vinson, Deputy Director and Researcher at UC Berkeley's Center for Cities and Schools. I've spent 10 years studying K-12 school facilities policy, planning, and funding, both in California and across the country. I've looked at what every other state has done on this. To Member Chavez's point, I can tell you how every state raises funds for their school facilities and how they disperse those funds. All of this material is available on our website. You have a summary in your packet of our most recent work. Much of my comments here today will come from that. In January of this year, we released Guided by Principles, Shaping the State of California's Role in K-12 Public School Facilities Funding. You were really the audience, those of you making the decision about what's next here. As we observed this debate over the recent months unfolding, Governor's proposal and others, it seemed to us that shared principles about where the state should go on this were not in place, yet sorely needed to guide policy decisions. So that's what we laid out based on our data analysis of what school districts in California are spending on the capital side, what they're spending on the maintenance side of their facilities over time. So we've looked at that data since 2007 to the present time, most recent data available to understand what's going on. We laid out the principles taking a cue from Michael Kirst, professor at Stanford and chair of the State Board of Education in 2008. He laid out with his co-authors the basic principles that became the LCFF as we know it. And we ask, what are fair, responsible options to advance the state's interest in promoting quality education, keeping children safe, and wisely using limited public dollars? So let me make 3 points, and I'll jump into the principles, and then I will wrap up. But the first is this is a very complex issue, but we can figure this out. So a lot of points got raised here, and we have to think through them. Local revenue capacity, previous facility effort at the local level, and current facility conditions vary enormously across the state. And I'll speak to that in a second. All states struggle in this regard. By my count, 15 states have been sued around facility conditions issues and their role in funding that. 2 is that the public, we have to spend money on our facilities. It's not an option not to, or we run enormous risks of health and safety at the very, at one end. The standard minimum best practice noted by researchers and the building industry is 2 to 4%. If you own a building, you need to spend 2 to 4% of its replacement value every year to keep it in steady state. So I want to come back to that 2 to 4%. That does not include new construction for enrollment growth, and that does not include the occasional, more significant modernizations, as we call them, right? To this point, what our research suggests, and to some of the points made by some of the other speakers, is that across California, we have a long-standing, chronic, and building annual underinvestment in our existing school facilities. I don't think we as a state have fully committed to the cost of ownership of these public buildings. So Ms. Kwong asked me to speak to what is the state's responsibility on school facilities, and I have language here on that, but I think I will skip through it quickly. But what I will say is that looking at the legal cases on this, it appears that the state has a fundamental responsibility in ensuring quality school facilities. If you go back to 1992's Butt versus California, that said that the state had the responsibility for providing basic equality of educational opportunity, and that things cannot fall below fundamentally below prevailing statewide standards. Right? They were not speaking specifically about facilities, but it was sort of implied in there. But then there were 2 cases that did specifically, in particular, speak to facilities. One was filed in 2000, and this was the Williams versus the state of California, which focused on gross disparities in school facility conditions across the state, and in particular, overcrowding. When the case was settled in 2004, the state recognized the importance of facilities and established the good repair standard that's in the Ed Code that was really around clean, quote, clean, safe, and functional facilities. Serrano versus Priest, that has been raised here. Of course, this has shaped enormously how we funded education. The plaintiffs identified material inequality in school facilities as one ground supporting their successful claim that relying on local property taxes to finance public education violated the Constitution's equal protection guarantee. So of central concern here is that leaving the responsibility of school facilities capital outlay at the local level will most likely perpetuate wide variation in the quality of school facilities. That's your point has been brought up. So let me jump now to these principles, and then I will wrap up. 5 principles. Borrowing from sort of the tenor of LCFF, what we have seen nationally on best practice in facilities, school facilities. Principle 1 is around equity. Principle 2 is local district effort and accountability. Principle 3 is fiscal stability and predictability. Principle 4 is facilities adequacy, and I want to pay particular attention to that in a second. And 5 is program simplicity. So principle 1, the state's role should ensure equity in public school facility conditions, and the state facility funding allocations should be equitably distributed, guided by students, staff, and school needs. Why would we need to do this? We would need to do this for a couple of reasons. Mainly because the local ability to raise school facility funds appears uneven. In our paper that you have a copy of, where we analyze the trends of what's going on across the country, or across the state on facilities spending by districts, what we find is that if you look at assessed value, school districts serving the highest share of high poverty students have about 42% of the statewide average AV. So they have much less AV. Sorry, I said that wrong. 42% of the average AV of the districts serving the fewest high poverty students. On your handout that you have, the chart is on the back of that, which you can look at. But there's wide disparities in local ability to pay. In looking at maintenance expenditures by districts since 2000, one of the interesting things that we found is that districts serving the most high poverty students are spending about $100 to $200 more on maintenance and operations than districts serving the fewer high poverty students. And because maintenance dollars, as Joe Dixon said, typically come from the operation side of the budget, what this may mean is that these districts serving these students are taking $100 to $200 per student out of the general operating budget in order to put them in order to put it into their facilities. So it speaks to this issue of conditions, overall conditions, and the disparity in conditions that we see across the state. And while we've been trying to do this analysis of what's being spent on facilities, this doesn't account for, we don't have systematic data to understand the conditions. We can only know what's being spent, but we don't know what the conditions are. And this, in my mind, is really the big obstacle if you were to prioritize funds. If the governor said, I'm going to find $1 billion and I want someone to bring me the list of the worst conditioned schools in this state, we could not bring him that list. And how do we feel going forward as citizens? Principle 2, local district effort and accountability. School facility allocations by the state should incentivize responsible local planning, to Mr. Chavez's point, and investment at the local level for K-12 facilities. So it should not incentivize any local district or any local voters to not invest in their facilities such that the state would rescue them. One of the things that we see in the wide variation of capital outlay by school districts is that the top 20% of districts that spent the most were spending about, between 2007 and 2011, we're spending about $1,600 per student on the capital side. Those at the bottom 20% spending, we're only spending about $200 per student per year. We don't know exactly what this means, but it's a disparity in spending. Principle 3, fiscal stability and predictability. State facility allocation should be stable in nature to promote sound local planning. As the World Bank noted in a 1999 study on what our best practice for a K-12 capital program, stable funding was a hallmark because it enabled planning. Predictable funds decrease uncertainty and lower overall costs. Principle 4, facilities adequacy. And let me say something about this in a moment because I think a lot of people talk about equity and they talk about adequacy, but we need to have a handle of what adequacy is. State policies and funding allocation in K-12 facilities should strive to achieve adequate levels of combined state and local investment that best promotes health, safety, and educational suitability. So what is the minimum, the absolute minimum, that the state of California would need to invest in its K-12 school facilities every year? This is what I've been trying to figure out, and I think I have an answer. Come back to that 2 to 4%. Industry standards suggest spending 2 to 4%, if you're a building owner, is what you should spend every year to achieve this steady state of repair. So for our nearly 10,000 schools, estimating how much square footage we have, because we don't know how many buildings we have, we don't know how much square footage we have, estimating that based on numbers that the state uses, has seen in recent projects, we estimate that the mid-range of this 2 to 4% annually for this good repair is about $7 billion should be spent just to meet this maintenance benchmark. And this is before addressing new construction, this is before comprehensive modernization, and it's also probably not going to get us to the deferred maintenance that we have. That always quiets the room, so I apologize. But I want to be clear that, this is not necessarily the state's tab. This, as others have said, is a state-local partnership, right? So it would be a combination of state and local funds. And if you look at through the SFP and tally the kinds of dollars that have been spent on the capital side, what we see on average is that local districts were putting in about 70% of capital funds spent on projects, while the state was kicking in about 30%. And of course, there's the developer fees that squeeze into that as well, as Mr. Lyon mentioned. Principle 5, program simplicity. I think everyone wants things to be more simple, and I would agree, but I also think that this is a complicated issue, and we can only get as simple as the complexity allows us. Districts are tiny, districts are huge, districts are on the coast, districts have snow, districts have enormous heat, and they have wide variation in the age of their buildings, and all of these things factor into really what their needs are and what the costs are. So let me wrap up by saying the 5 principles that I think the state needs that forms the roadmap are equity, accountability, predictability, adequacy, and this issue of simplicity. So, these principles should be front and center as we think of this long-standing partnership. But I think the fundamental question that you need to ask is, in the absence of any state facility funds, will all districts be able to raise even minimum necessary facility funds on their own? And what strikes me about this broader debate is that it goes against the precedent set by Serrano and what we've outlined in LCFF on the school operations side, is that pushing revenue raising on facilities to the local level really does probably run the risk of widening disparities in facility conditions. So thank you very much, and I'd be happy to share any and all of our information as we move forward. We will continue to do this research over this year.
Thank you, Dr. Vincent. And what I really picked up out of your comments were the equity issue. What do we have today, and what could we have in the future? Should we alter this program to something that, in fact, widens that equity? So thank you. Are there any comments from the committee? Mr. Chavez, that was very thorough, very good, and you gave me some stuff to think about, honestly, the way you gave us some principles. I appreciate that.
Thank you. You're welcome.
So you did a good job. With that, thank you.